priest's sharp eye stops whetting, the groom's dark secret unveiled. The morning sun slanted across the cobblestone streets of the small town of Savannah, casting a soft golden glow over the ancient stone facade of St. Mary's Church. The church. Bells rang steadily, their sound cutting through the clear blue sky, weaving through the corners of the streets and slipping into half-closed windows of ivy-covered old houses. The locals were accustomed to such a scene. But today, there was something different, something more than just a wedding. Along the stone pathway leading to the church, white rose bouquets were neatly hung, gently swaying in the early summer breeze. Guests dressed in elegant outfits chatted and laughed amid the soft background music coming from speakers set up in front of the church. The atmosphere seemed peaceful and joyous. Yet, for some reason, a strange feeling crept silently into someone's heart. At the end of the path, the bride, Carolyn, appeared, wearing a pristine white wedding dress. Her face was radiant, though there was a trace of hesitation. She was known for being kind-hearted and reserved, a quiet figure in Savannah for many years. As a preschool teacher, Carolyn was regarded as gentle and compassionate, but her life had been marked by loss. Her parents died in an accident when she was only 18. Since then, she had lived alone, quietly making her way among the town's people, most of whom only knew her through polite greetings. "Carolyn looks beautiful," a whisper came from the guest benches. Standing beside her was the groom, Alexander, a man of polished appearance, smiling gently. His dark gray suit fit his tall frame perfectly, his black hair neatly combed, his bright brown eyes glistening as if they could speak. Alexander was a stranger to this town. He had only moved to Savannah a few months ago, but quickly attracted attention with his refined manners, gentle voice, and humble demeanor. "He's just perfect," a middle-aged woman murmured to her companion. That woman was Ellen, Caroline's best friend and colleague at the preschool. Father Michael, the elderly priest of St. Mary's Church, stood on the steps, his aged but sharp eyes observing every gesture of the couple. He had officiated hundreds of weddings over the past 30 years, and not much escaped his gaze. But today, as he looked at Alexander, a strange sensation crept over him, like a chill running down his spine. It was hard to describe, just a gut feeling, an unease born of experience. The music stopped. Guests began settling into their seats inside the church. The centuries-old stone walls enclosed the solemn space. Candlelight flickered, and the stained glass windows depicting crosses cast red and gold patterns on the floor. The setting looked like something out of a painting. But in Father Michael's heart, suspicion simmered. "Are you all right, Father?" A male voice spoke beside him. It was Stephen, the young lean altar server who was busy adjusting the marriage registry book. He had noticed the priest's momentary look of concern and spoke up. "I'm fine," Father Michael replied softly, his eyes still fixed on Alexander, the man who stood beside Carolyn, holding her hand gently, smiling with lips too perfect, too rehearsed, as if calculated. The ceremony began. Father Michael's deep voice echoed solemnly within the ancient sanctuary. "Dear children, today, before God and this congregation, we gather here to witness a sacred covenant." Prayers and blessings followed in a steady rhythm. The guests listened in silence. Ellen sat in the front row, her eyes shining with joy for her dear friend. Occasionally, she dabbed at the corners of her eyes, moved by emotion. Alexander followed every ritual flawlessly, without a moment of hesitation. His every movement, from the gentle smile to the nods and the loving gaze he gave Carolyn, was precise, almost as if pre-programmed. Caroline didn't notice. Her eyes were filled with happiness and nerves. However, in that quiet moment, Father Michael noticed something odd. Alexander looked at his watch 3 times. The silver timepiece on his wrist caught the church lights and shimmered, and each time he checked it, he smiled the same exact smile, followed by 3 subtle nods, light but consistent, like an instinct. It made Father Michael uneasy. "That's strange," he muttered under his breath, recalling the chill he had felt earlier. The ceremony paused for a brief interlude of light, mingling after the initial rites. Guests gathered in the church courtyard. Glasses of wine passed around. Cheerful conversations filled the air. Alexander and Carolyn walked among them, shaking hands, chatting. "Ellen, thank you for being here," Carolyn said, squeezing Ellen's hand, her eyes full of gratitude and emotion. "You look beautiful, Caroline." "Alexander is a lucky man," Ellen smiled, glancing at the groom. Alexander tilted his head slightly, flashing his perfect smile. He began recounting the story of how he and Carolyn met. "We met at a charity event for the orphanage here in Savannah," Alexander began, his voice steady, not a hint of hesitation. Father Michael stood nearby, listening without meaning to. But then he noticed something strange. Alexander was repeating the exact same story he had told before, when he had come to request the marriage license. Every sentence, every word was identical. The tone, the gestures, even the way he nodded, completely mechanical. The priest froze, the suspicion inside him growing louder. An internal alarm sounded in his mind. "He's performing," Michael thought, heart pounding. Stephen came over, whispering, "Are you okay, Father? You look pale." Michael shook his head slightly, his eyes never leaving Alexander, as a predator watching prey in a dense forest. "This feeling, it's familiar," he murmured, old memories beginning to stir. Alexander's smile, those eyes, that posture, it all seemed like something from a dark past that Michael couldn't quite forget. As the guests continued chatting cheerfully, Father Michael's gaze stayed locked on Alexander. He stepped back into a shadowy corner of the church hallway. Light streamed across cracked stone walls. Incense lingered in the air, making the atmosphere feel even heavier. Alexander, still smiling, continued speaking to each guest, recounting the story of his fateful encounter with Caroline with a fluency that felt memorized. "That day, I went to the orphanage on behalf of a charity group. Caroline was sitting with the children, reading them fairy tales. I stood there watching her for 5 minutes without daring to approach," Alexander said, his gentle smile as if painted on. Ellen giggled, eyes glowing with admiration. "So romantic, like something out of a movie," she exclaimed, unable to hide her awe. But to Father Michael, every word felt like a dagger plunging into his instincts. He remembered clearly when Alexander first came to the church to request the wedding documents. He told this same story, word for word. Not a single detail had changed. He leaned in and whispered to Stephen, "Listen carefully. He's telling the whole thing like a memorized script." Stephen looked momentarily confused, glanced toward Alexander, then nodded slightly. "It's exactly the same, word for word." Michael gripped the wedding registry tighter, a chill running down his spine. His instinct, something that had spared him countless troubles over his 30 years as a priest, had never been wrong. At that very moment, a man approached Alexander to strike up a conversation. He was tall, dark-skinned, with sharp eyes. It was Richard, an American, supposedly an old classmate of Alexander's, at least according to what Alexander had told Caroline. "Ryan, it's been a long time," Richard said, patting Alexander on the shoulder. That name, Ryan, made Father Michael freeze for a second, but Alexander quickly brushed it off with a laugh, correcting his friend. "You're mistaken, Richard. I'm Alexander, remember?" he said with a loud laugh, gripping Richard's shoulder. Richard hesitated for a moment, but then gave a sheepish smile and patted Alexander again. "Right, Alexander. You're the guy who's always changing names," Richard joked, thinking nothing of it. Father Michael frowned, the weight of his unease growing heavier. The conversation carried on. Alexander kept smiling flawlessly, and Carolyn remained blissfully happy, oblivious to anything strange. But Michael wasn't. He continued to watch every small movement and noticed once again. Alexander checked his watch 3 times, then nodded 3 times, identical, rhythmic, like clockwork. It couldn't be a coincidence. Michael stepped back, his gaze drifting into the past. 15 years ago, Providence. He had served then as the priest at St. Vincent Church. That was when the entire region was shaken by a sophisticated marriage fraud case. A man who claimed to be a wealthy entrepreneur had targeted middle-aged, single, or isolated women. He spun romantic tales, married them, then vanished with their assets. Some lost only money. Others lost their lives. The police investigated the case for 2 years, but the man was too clever, constantly changing his identity and appearance. All they had were a few clips from hidden surveillance cameras. In them, the suspect displayed one particular habit. He would glance at his watch 3 times, nod 3 times, and only then begin speaking. That detail had haunted Father Michael for years. It etched itself into his memory. Despite no conclusive evidence, the case was closed due to lack of proof. The suspect, Ryan Johnson, disappeared without a trace in 2013. And now, standing before him, Alexander was repeating the exact same gestures. "No, it can't be," Michael murmured, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Ellen came over, concerned. "Father Michael, are you all right? You look pale." He shook his head, his voice suddenly much lower. "Ellen, do you believe in intuition?" She looked surprised but nodded softly. "Yes, why, Father?" Michael didn't explain. His eyes remained fixed on Alexander, who was still holding Caroline's hand. The man continued smiling, still perfect, still disturbingly flawless. On his left wrist, the silver watch flashed again. As he glanced at it for the 3rd time and nodded 3 times, Michael's heart clenched. This could not go on. He turned to Stephen. "I need your help. I have to check this man's background." Stephen furrowed his brow. "But his documents are all in order, Father." Michael clutched the registry book tighter. Documents can be forged, but someone's nature doesn't change. He scanned the room for someone he could trust. His eyes landed on Richard, the American friend who had called Alexander Ryan. Michael approached him and asked in a low voice, "How long have you known Alexander?" Richard smiled awkwardly. "To be honest, I only met him a few times in Providence. That name Ryan, it's just what some old friends used to call him. Just a nickname. Really, Father?" Michael flinched at the mention of Providence. Another puzzle. Piece clicked into place. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But please don't mention this to anyone." Richard raised an eyebrow, sensing the odd tension, but nodded. Michael turned back, his eyes heavy with concern as he looked at Carolyn. The young woman was still chatting happily, unaware of the danger lurking right beside her. "She's too innocent," he whispered. A decision began forming in his mind. He had to verify it immediately. If his instincts were correct, this wedding had to be stopped. And if he was wrong, he was willing to take the consequences. Alexander continued to play the role of the perfect groom. But in Father Michael's eyes, the chill had already sunk into every nerve in his body. The church bells rang again, drawing everyone's attention back to the ceremony. But for Father Michael, those sounds only intensified the flood of memories, like layers of dust being blown off old recollections, each fragment falling into place. Providence, summer 2010. That was when Father Michael had just been assigned to St. Vincent Church, one of the city's oldest and most renowned parishes. The cobblestone streets, the pale yellow walls of the old town district, still lived vividly in his mind. But the clearest memory was not of Mass or confessions. It was of the case that had shaken the city to its core. A man handsome, well-spoken, claiming to be a real estate businessman had appeared in Providence like a passing breeze. He targeted single, middle-aged, or isolated women, especially those with wealth or property inheritances. Within 2 years, at least 3 women had been tricked into marrying him. He then disappeared with all their money and savings. One of them, Mrs. Lucy Fields, a retired schoolteacher, went missing without a trace just 3 weeks after her wedding. The press dubbed him the Phantom Groom. Police searched everywhere, but he was too skillful. Each time he reappeared, he used a new identity, complete with flawless forged documents, altered hair, and expertly disguised appearance. Michael remembered clearly when he was supporting the family of the missing woman, Lucy. He had been involved in assisting the investigation. The police had shown him a surveillance video captured in a restaurant where the suspect was seen dining with Lucy. Michael had never forgotten that moment. In the video, the man sat across from Lucy, polite, charming. But one detail made Michael's skin crawl, even years later. He looked at his watch 3 times, smiled, nodded 3 times very lightly, and then began to speak. That habit repeated throughout the footage like clockwork, mechanical, inhuman. Who is that man? Michael had once asked the young police officer. Back then, Susan Wilson, a well-known female detective in Providence. Susan shook her head, her eyes tense. All we know is that he called himself Ryan Johnson, but there's no real record of him. Fake name, fake background. We suspect he committed similar crimes in other cities, but we have no solid proof. Michael shivered. That gesture, looking at his watch 3 times, nodding 3 times, that's not a coincidence. Susan nodded. Exactly. It's an ingrained habit. But we can't convict someone based solely on that. The case fell into a deadlock. Ryan Johnson had vanished in 2013 without a trace. Michael thought he had forgotten, or at least hoped the memory would never come back. But today, in Savannah, under the light of St. Mary's Church, that same habit had reappeared on Alexander's wrist, on that charming, polished face. He clenched his hands, heart pounding. Stephen approached, concern in his voice. "Father, you're still not feeling well." Michael gritted his teeth. "You know I used to live in Providence, right?" Stephen nodded. "Yes, but what does that have to do with today?" Michael sighed, his eyes heavy with burden. 15 years ago, I assisted in an investigation. A con man who married women to steal their assets, then disappeared. One of them vanished without a trace." Stephen's eyes widened. "You think Alexander?" Michael nodded, his voice gravelly. "I can't be sure yet, but that gesture, watching the clock 3 times, nodding 3 times, it's identical." Stephen turned pale. "My God, if he really is ... double quotes." Michael cut him off, eyes steely. "I need confirmation. I have to contact someone back in Providence." Stephen nodded and quickly pulled out his phone. The signal inside the church was weak, so he stepped out into the hallway. Meanwhile, Michael headed to the church's preparation room to dig up Alexander's wedding records. Everything on paper was perfect. ID card, birth certificate, certificate of single status, everything matched. But Michael knew if this man was truly Ryan Johnson, he could forge anything. He pulled out his phone and searched for the old contact of Susan Wilson, the officer who had worked the Providence case. The ringing seemed to go on forever, his nerves fraying with every second. "Hello," a familiar, slightly raspy female voice answered with surprise. "Susan, it's Michael from St. Vincent Church." Susan paused briefly. "Oh my God, it's been years." "Why are you calling me, Father?" Michael didn't hesitate. "Susan, I'm in Savannah. There's a wedding, and the groom ... I suspect he's Ryan Johnson." Silence for a few seconds. Then Susan replied quickly, "Are you sure? Ryan disappeared more than 10 years ago. His case is still in the Justice Department system." Michael gripped the phone tighter. The gestures, the habits, they're identical. He's calling himself Alexander. All his papers check out, but my instinct isn't wrong. Susan went quiet for a moment. "All right, send me a photo of him right now. I'll check the biometric database." Michael exhaled sharply, snapped photos of Alexander's documents and a few quick shots from the ceremony, and sent them. Then he stood there, frozen, heart pounding with dread, every second crawling by. Outside, cheerful music started up again. Caroline and Alexander re-entered the church to begin the main ceremony. The bride was radiant in her white dress, completely unaware that a nightmare was quietly unfolding behind her. Michael stood just behind the door, his hand trembling as he clutched the wedding registry. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Susan messaged, "I'm running it through the database. Give me a few minutes." Those few minutes felt like a century to Michael. His mind flooded with memories from that old case, the victim Lucy Fields, the desperate faces of her family, the sleepless nights haunted by that dangerous conman. The phone buzzed. Susan had messaged, 96% biometric match with Ryan Johnson. "I'm alerting the Savannah police right now." Michael went numb. His hand shook violently. Susan's final message was like a blade cutting through his thoughts. 96% match. Highly likely. "He's Ryan Johnson. I've informed the local police. They're en route." Michael stood motionless behind the door of the church's preparation room, gripping his phone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His breath was shallow, each heartbeat thudding loudly in his chest like a war drum heralding disaster. Outside, the organ music swelled. Guests settled into their seats. Caroline and Alexander walked hand in hand down the aisle, the white roses swaying softly, creating a seemingly sacred and beautiful scene. But to Michael, everything looked warped and hollow, like a dangerous play unfolding before his eyes. Stephen peeked into the room, voice tight. "Father, did the police say how long they'll take?" Michael took a deep breath, his voice steady. "Not long now, but we need to be careful. If he's truly Ryan, he's more dangerous than we thought." Stephen swallowed hard and nodded, his eyes filled with a tension he had never felt before. He was just a young altar server. He had never faced anything like this. Michael continued, "We can't cause a scene yet. We need to stall the ceremony as long as we can to give the police time to arrive." Stephen nodded again, then rushed off to make preparations. Michael stood in silence for a few more seconds, then opened his phone again to review Alexander's marriage registration documents. According to the paperwork, his full name was Alexander Reynolds, born in 1984 in Austin, occupation financial advisor. Everything matched his ID and temporary residence registration in Savannah, filed less than 4 months ago. Attached were Caroline's asset declarations, a small apartment on the outskirts of Savannah, a modest savings account from her preschool teacher's salary, and most importantly, her late parents' old house. Though in disrepair, it was located in the city center and held significant market value. Michael clenched the documents, heart aching. The puzzle pieces were fitting together too clearly. A young, orphaned woman living alone with inherited property. A charming man who appeared suddenly and won her heart. Repeated gestures identical to the con man from years ago. He recalled Susan's words. Ryan Johnson married 3 women. 2 lost all their assets. 1 disappeared, never found. If Caroline became the next victim, the thought made Michael's skin crawl. The door burst open. Ellen stepped in, her face drawn with concern. "Father, what's going on?" "Stephen said you suspect Alexander." Michael hesitated, then pulled her into the room and shut the door. He knew Ellen was Caroline's best friend. He could trust her. "Ellen, listen to me carefully," Michael whispered, his expression grave. "I have reason to believe that Alexander is actually Ryan Johnson, a wanted criminal from Providence." Ellen's face went pale. "No, that can't be. Alexander, he's perfect. Caroline, she loves him so much." Ellen stammered, her voice trembling. Michael gripped her shoulders firmly. "That's exactly why it's dangerous. He preys on women like Caroline. His entire identity could be fabricated. The police are already on their way." Ellen's voice shook. "Oh God, does Caroline know?" Michael shook his head. "Not yet. I need you to stay calm and help me buy time. Don't let anything slip." Ellen nodded, her eyes wide with fear but full of resolve. Meanwhile, in the church's waiting area, Alexander was chatting with a few guests, still wearing that polished smile, still offering those gentle eyes, but anyone observant could detect the coldness behind the perfection. Caroline stood beside him, her face glowing with happiness. She held Alexander's hand, her eyes sparkling. It still feels like a dream. You came into my life so suddenly and changed everything. Alexander smiled softly, his hand resting gently on her back. Sometimes the best things come when we least expect them, my love. He glanced at his watch for the first time, a slight smirk curling his lips, then continued talking. Ellen approached, hiding her tension. Caroline, Father Michael said there are still a few documents that need to be verified. Could you wait just a little longer? Caroline looked surprised. What documents? We already prepared everything. Ellen forced a smile. Just a couple of confirmations. You know how careful Father Michael is. Alexander kept smiling, glancing at his watch a second time without saying a word. Stephen circled to the main entrance, pretending to check the sound system, but in truth, he was watching for the arrival of the police. Back in the preparation room, Michael continued reviewing documents, eyes glued to his phone. Suddenly, a new message from Susan appeared. He's used more than 7 different identities. Providence, Chicago, Phoenix. Ryan is extremely dangerous. He might react violently if he realizes he's been exposed. Michael swallowed hard, his heart pounding. The door burst open. Stephen rushed in, breathless. The police said they're close. They want us to keep the scene stable. Don't raise his suspicions. Michael nodded, taking a deep breath to steady himself. All right, I'll try to stall the ceremony. He walked out of the room, doing his best to appear calm, and made his way toward the altar. At that same moment, Alexander and Caroline entered the sanctuary, all eyes turning toward them. The church bell rang to signal the start of the ceremony. Guests began taking their seats, and a reverent hush fell over the church. Michael stood at the pulpit, clutching the Bible, his eyes scanning the room, pausing on Alexander. The man still wore a smile, his eyes almost knowing, the corners of his mouth twitching ever so slightly. The wedding ceremony began, but this time Michael deliberately slowed down each step. He read the scriptures at a slower pace, frequently, double-checking papers, occasionally pretending to turn to the wrong page, all to delay the proceedings. The guests began to murmur. Caroline looked slightly worried. Alexander, on the other hand, remained composed, occasionally checking his watch exactly 3 times, then nodding 3 times, just like a machine. Michael shuddered. Stephen stood near the main entrance, eyes fixed outside. Across the street, 2 plainclothes officers had arrived and were quietly making their way toward the church. Sweat beaded on Michael's brow, but he continued drawing out the ceremony, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. The church bell rang long and low, echoing through the ancient stone arches. For a brief moment, the entire space seemed to freeze in time. Michael stood motionless at the altar, his eyes sharp as they scanned every face. But more than anyone, he locked eyes with Alexander, or rather Ryan Johnson. There was no official police order yet, but with over 30 years of experience, Michael knew one misstep could cause the man to vanish, just as he had so many times before. Behind him, Stephen remained at the church doors, eyes fixed on the entrance. The 2 plainclothes officers had slipped into the back pews, pretending to be guests, their eyes sharp and focused. Ellen sat beside Caroline, her hand tightly gripping her friend's. Her palms were soaked with sweat. She knew the terrifying truth hidden beneath that perfect mask. Michael cleared his throat and began the ceremony. We are gathered here today, in the sight of God, to witness the sacred union of 2 people. His voice was steady, but each sentence stretched out, every word carefully paced to buy time. Alexander kept smiling, his eyes occasionally drifting down to the watch on his left wrist. Michael didn't miss a single movement. Each time Alexander looked down, it was followed by 3 subtle nods, exactly like what he had seen in the surveillance video of Ryan Johnson. The crowd began to whisper. Some guests muttered, "Why is Father Michael speaking so slowly today? Maybe he's not feeling well." Ellen leaned over and whispered to Carolyn, feigning concern. "Father Michael must be a little unwell today. The ceremony might take a bit longer." Carolyn nodded, a bit puzzled, but her eyes still sparkled with joy as she looked at Alexander. Michael continued, "Before we proceed with the formal rites, I would like to double-check the marriage registration paperwork to ensure there are no discrepancies." He held the folder, flipping through the pages as if searching for something. In reality, he was simply stalling, counting every second, waiting for the police to move. Alexander maintained his polished demeanor, but a flicker of suspicion began to creep into his eyes. He watched Michael, then leaned in and whispered softly to Carolyn, "Seems like the good father's a bit flustered today, doesn't he, love?" Carolyn giggled, completely unsuspecting. "Maybe he just wants to make sure everything's perfect." Michael glanced toward the back pews, where the 2 officers exchanged a quick nod. They were ready. Stephen approached the altar, pretending to adjust the microphone, and leaned in close. "They said they can move in at any time." Michael gave a faint nod but didn't act yet. He knew if this man truly was Ryan, he was incredibly dangerous, and had vanished like a ghost right under the police's nose more than once. He kept stalling. "Before I pronounce you husband and wife, I'd like to confirm the inheritance documents, just to make sure there will be no future disputes." His words caused a stir among the crowd. Caroline looked surprised. "Father, why are we checking that now?" Michael stepped down from the altar, approaching Caroline and Alexander, pretending to inspect the folder. Alexander smiled, his eyes glancing over Michael, studying him. "Father, we submitted all the documents last week. You can rest assured everything's in order." Michael raised his eyes and stared directly at Alexander, his gaze sharp as a blade piercing through the polished mask. "That's exactly why I need to check again, more carefully." A heavy silence fell over the church. Ellen gripped Caroline's hand tightly, her palm ice cold. Alexander kept smiling, but his hand subtly tightened around Caroline's wrist, a silent warning. Michael noticed it. His heart pounded, but he kept a calm exterior. "It's just procedure, Alexander." "Or should I call you Ryan Johnson?" The atmosphere exploded. Every eye turned toward them. Carolyn froze. Alexander paused for a split second, just long enough for Michael and the officers to catch it. The 2 plainclothes officers immediately stepped forward, flashing their badges. "National Police. Ryan Johnson, you're under arrest on a warrant issued by the Providence judiciary." The church erupted into chaos. Carolyn gasped, stunned. "What? No, this can't be." Alexander instantly gripped her tighter, pulling her toward him, his eyes flashing with a sharp, dangerous glint unseen until now. "Stay calm, my love," he whispered, his tone cold and threatening. Michael rushed forward, stepping between them. "Let her go, Ryan." The officers drew their handcuffs, advancing on Alexander. He backed up, eyes darting for an escape route, but Stephen and several guests had already blocked the exits. Alexander released Carolyn, his eyes darkened. A smirk played on his lips. "Well done, Father Michael." Impressive memory. He didn't deny it. Didn't pretend anymore. The flawless mask he had worn for months shattered in an instant. The officers closed in, locking the cuffs around his wrists as they clearly recited, "Ryan Johnson, you're wanted for marriage fraud, asset theft, and suspected involvement in the disappearance of Lucy Fields." Carolyn collapsed to the stone floor, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, this can't be. You lied to me all this time." Alexander turned his head to her, no trace of tenderness in his expression. "You're far too naive, Carolyn." Michael stepped forward and gently helped her to her feet, his voice trembling. You almost became his next victim. Thank God we uncovered the truth in time. The crowd was still in shock. Many guests covered their mouths in horror. Others stepped back, their faces full of fear. The police escorted Ryan out, but he turned to look back at Michael, his eyes burning with hatred. Next time, you won't be so lucky, Father. Michael clenched his fists. There won't be a next time, Alexander. Rather, Ryan Johnson. Ryan was led out to a waiting patrol car, leaving behind a ruined wedding, a bride broken with betrayal, and a town left in utter disbelief. Michael turned and embraced Carolyn, who was trembling. You're safe now, I promise. But inside, the priest's unease hadn't faded. The commotion outside the church gates had barely settled when the heavy front doors creaked open, grabbing everyone's attention once more. 3 uniformed officers entered, their expressions tense, eyes sweeping the room before locking onto Alexander, still cuffed. Leading them was Lieutenant James Thompson, a stout man with piercing eyes, known throughout the Savannah police force for his no-nonsense approach. He pulled a file from his coat and opened it, his gravelly voice echoing through the church. Ryan Johnson, a.k.a. Alexander Reynolds. You are under arrest under a national warrant for crimes including grand theft, identity fraud, and suspected organized homicide. The congregation was stunned into silence. Whispers broke out. Several women gasped and covered their mouths. Others instinctively stepped back, eyes wide with fear. Caroline was still kneeling on the stone floor, her face ghostly pale, eyes brimming with tears, unable to comprehend what she was hearing. Ellen dropped to her knees beside her, clutching her friend's shaking hands. Caroline, listen to me, it's all true. He's not Alexander. He's Ryan Johnson, the man wanted in Providence for years. Caroline shook her head, tears falling freely. No, it can't be. He loved me. He saved me from being alone after all these years. Michael stepped closer, kneeling to place a hand on her shoulder, his voice warm but sorrowful. I'm so sorry, Caroline. But this is the truth. He's deceived many women, and you nearly became his next victim. Alexander, no, Ryan maintained, his cold, smug smile scanning the crowd. Even in handcuffs, he showed no fear or remorse. Lieutenant Thompson stepped closer, holding up a biometric match photo from judicial records. The face in the image was a perfect match to Alexander's. This is you, Ryan Johnson. A 96% match on fingerprints. Facial recognition confirms identity. Don't waste your breath denying it. Ryan smirked, his voice flat and unbothered. You really think I'd be stupid enough to leave fingerprints? You've been chasing me for over a decade and never caught me. James Thompson tightened the handcuffs. You're not getting away this time. The guests still hadn't recovered from the shock. Some rose hesitantly from their seats, whispering in disbelief. My God, he's a murderer. He looked so charming. Poor Carolyn, that poor girl. Michael motioned for Stephen to help restore order, but he himself couldn't take his eyes off Ryan. The man's cold gaze, tall frame, and false charm, all of it, matched the face that had haunted him for 15 years. Lieutenant Thompson flipped through the case file, his voice deep and steady. You married 3 different women in 3 different cities, Austin, Phoenix, and Providence. 2 of them lost. Everything homes, savings. The 3rd, Lucy Fields, vanished without a trace. Her body has never been found. Ryan chuckled, the sound chilling the air in the church. Where's the proof? All you people have are words. Thompson remained unfazed. We have anonymous financial transactions linked to an account under the name Alexander Reynolds, matching assets stolen from your past victims. And most recently, you were preparing to claim the inherited home of Miss Caroline. Caroline let out a sharp breath, her hands clutching the folds of her wedding gown. No, I told him everything about the house, about my parents' savings. Oh God. Ellen held her tighter, whispering, "Don't blame yourself. None of us could have guessed. Who knew he was such a skilled liar?" Michael stepped forward, now face to face with Ryan, his eyes burning with fury. "I recognized you from the start. You changed your appearance, your paperwork. But habits don't lie. 3 looks at your watch. 3 nods. You really thought no one would notice." Ryan tilted his head, smirking. "Impressive, father. I didn't expect your memory to be that sharp." Thompson yanked the handcuffs sharply and ordered the officers, "That's enough. We'll talk at the station." Ryan turned his head, his eyes flicking toward Caroline with a twisted mix of mockery and coldness. "You really did love me, didn't you, Caroline? Shame I didn't get the chance to take all your assets." Caroline broke down in sobs, her entire body trembling. Michael leaned down, holding her shoulders firmly. "Don't blame yourself. He's a professional predator. You're a victim, not the one at fault." The echo of the clinking handcuffs filled the church as Ryan was let out, the crowd glaring at him with visible contempt. Police cordoned off the church area and began gathering statements from witnesses, including Michael, Stephen, and Ellen. James Thompson returned and gave Michael a light pat on the shoulder. "Thank you for acting quickly, father. If not for you, there might have been another victim today." Michael sighed, his eyes distant. "I only did my duty. But still, I let him slip through the cracks for far too long." Outside, a light rain began to fall. Droplets streaked down the stained glass windows of the church, like smears of blood staining the past. The sound of the police car siren faded into the distance, lost in the rain-slicked cobblestone streets of Savannah. But the heavy atmosphere lingered within St. Mary's Church, dot in a back room behind the sanctuary. Caroline sat hunched on a bench, eyes blank, hands trembling as they clutched a crumpled white lace handkerchief. Ellen sat beside her, trying to steady her with a gentle grip. "Caroline, I'm so sorry. I never imagined it would turn out like this." Caroline shook her head faintly, her lips pressed tight as she fought back the sobs. She looked down at the fadu. Once dreamed of wedding gown, now just cold, ruined fabric stained with tears and betrayal. "He said he loved me, said he'd protect me." Her voice cracked and fell silent. Father Michael entered, his face weary and heavy with sorrow. He sat across from Caroline, his voice rough from everything that had just happened. "Caroline, I know. Nothing I say will be easy to hear right now, but you need to know the truth." Caroline lifted her head slightly, her eyes vacant. Michael reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a file James Thompson had left behind. Inside were detailed records on Ryan Johnson, the man who had impersonated Alexander and once shaken all of Providence. "He's done this to at least 3 other women before you," Michael began, voice steady but grim. "The first was in Austin. He married a wealthy woman, took all her money, and vanished. The second in Phoenix, she lost everything and fell into years of depression." Caroline tightened her grip on the handkerchief, her eyes swollen and red. Michael continued, his tone somber. "The third, Lucy Fields in Providence. She disappeared without a trace just 3 weeks after their wedding. Her body has never been found." Ellen gasped, covering her mouth in horror. "My God, he killed someone." Michael nodded slowly. "There's no concrete evidence to charge him with murder, but every sign points to that possibility." Caroline trembled. "So if he hadn't been stopped today, I might have disappeared too." Michael looked at her, his expression serious. "I can't say that for certain, but from what I know, the chances are very high." Outside, the guests still lingered, whispering in hushed clusters. "I can't believe it. He faked it so well. They say he changed names constantly. He's incredibly smart. Poor Caroline, she didn't deserve this." Police continued processing the scene, collecting statements and evidence. James Thompson was at the front door, speaking with Stephen. His voice was firm. We found evidence of asset transfers through anonymous accounts under the name Alexander. He planned everything. Stephen frowned. So he approached Carolyn because of her parents' house. Thompson nodded. Exactly. The house may be old, but it's in downtown Savannah. It's worth a lot if sold. And with a woman who lives alone like her, he figured it would be easy. Stephen clenched his fists. Thank God Father Michael was paying attention, or else Carolyn would have ... double quotes. Thompson sighed. He targets women like her, quiet, isolated, those who've lost faith in people. And he uses charm as a weapon. Inside, Carolyn heard their voices. Each word cut deeper. She remembered it all, every time Alexander, or rather, Ryan had asked about her with such tenderness. Every night he told her stories of past wounds. Every time he held her hand when she trembled from memories of being orphaned. It was all part of a meticulously crafted performance. Carolyn buried her face in her hands and sobbed. I was so stupid. I let him trick me so easily. Ellen wrapped her arms around her. It's not your fault. He's a professional. No one could have known, Michael added, his voice quiet but resolute. Carolyn, you weren't the first. And if we hadn't acted, you wouldn't have been the last. Carolyn looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. You mean there could be more women, others like me? Michael nodded. Ryan may have accomplices, and there are others out there like him. We need to warn them. The door creaked open. Richard, the American friend who had accidentally called Ryan by his real name, stepped in, guilt written all over his face. I'm sorry, everyone. If I had remembered sooner, maybe it wouldn't have gotten this far. Michael raised a hand. It's not your fault. Ryan was a master of hiding his identity. Richard lowered his head. I met him in Providence. He introduced himself as Ryan. Then a few days later, he went by Alexander. I never suspected a thing. Carolyn looked up at him, her voice unsteady. How long have you known him? Richard shook his head. Just a few times at social events. He constantly changed names, friends, places. No one really knew anything. Michael sighed, the weight of it all etched on his face. That's why we need to do something to stop crimes like this. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Each droplet hit the pavement like cold tears, washing away the perfect mask Ryan had worn for years. Carolyn sat in silence, her mind reeling. She hadn't just lost a man she loved. She had lost her sense of safety, her trust, her very self. Michael gently placed a hand on her shoulder. You're alive. That's what matters most. But I know the wounds inside will take a long time to heal. Carolyn clutched her ruined lace handkerchief, her voice choked with emotion. I don't know if I can trust anyone again. Michael said softly, then trust yourself and the people who stood by you. Ellen took her hand. I'm not going anywhere. We'll get through this together. Outside, James Thompson gave the signal for the police to begin packing up. The scene was being cleared, but the aftershock of the ruined wedding remained. The town of Savannah was in turmoil. News of Ryan Johnson spread quickly across the headlines. Public opinion was divided. Some praised Father Michael for his timely intervention. Others criticized him for being too suspicious and ruining someone's happy day. But for Carolyn, simple trust had already shattered. Her soul felt like a wall cracked open after an earthquake. It would take a very long time to heal. Silently, she slid the fake wedding ring off her finger. Her eyes were full of tears, but deep within them glimmered a faint light of clarity. I won't let him or anyone else destroy me ever again. Michael nodded, his gaze resolute. You survived. That's the beginning. 6 months after that fateful day, Savannah had slipped into autumn. The trees lining the central square had begun to turn golden, and leaves drifted gently in the wind like quiet traces of passing time. But for Caroline, those 6 months had been a journey of rebirth, a complete transformation from within. On an autumn morning, Soft sunlight poured into the small apartment where Caroline now lived. The space was warm, modest, but tidy. On the table, a stack of basic law books was neatly arranged beside an open laptop. Caroline sat there, her long brown hair falling gently around her shoulders, eyes shining with determination. On the screen, she was completing the final assignment for her course, Women's Rights in Marriage and Financial Fraud Prevention. Ellen walked in, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee, placing them on the table. Drink up before it gets cold. You're so focused. Final exam coming up? Caroline smiled softly, her smile far steadier than the one she wore the day she collapsed in that church. Already done. This is the last assignment. Once I submit it, I'll officially earn the certificate. Ellen raised her eyebrows. Already? You finished an entire marriage law course in just 6 months. Caroline lightly squeezed the book in her hands. I spent 6 years trusting the wrong person. 6 months learning my rights still isn't enough. Ellen fell silent, her eyes filling with admiration. She knew all too well how difficult those months had been for Caroline. After Ryan Johnson's arrest, Caroline had fallen into a deep crisis, panic attacks, sleepless nights, nightmares that left her broken. But from the depths of that despair, Caroline chose to rise. She sought out women's support groups, started therapy, and slowly began equipping herself with legal knowledge, determined never to be a victim again. Ellen sipped her coffee, then asked gently, "So that No More Masks project you mentioned, how's it going?" Caroline's eyes lit up with conviction. Father Michael helped a lot. He called on pro bono lawyers, reached out to women's rights organizations. I've been attending seminars, speaking at panels. We formed an official team now. Ellen's eyes widened. That fast? It feels like just yesterday you were crying in that dark little room. Caroline clenched her fist slightly. Because I don't want anyone else to cry the way I did. Her phone rang. It was Father Michael calling. Caroline picked up, and his familiar, warm voice came through. Caroline, are you ready? We've got a meeting with Attorney Paul this morning. Caroline stood, her eyes brimming with determination. I've just finished my final paper. I'm heading to the center now. Ellen gave her a thumbs up. Go get him, Savannah's warrior queen. The headquarters of No More Masks stood on a street corner near the central square. Though only a few months old, thanks to community support, media coverage, and advocates like Father Michael, it had quickly become a safe haven for women seeking protection. Caroline entered the conference room, where Father Michael and Attorney Paul Mitchell were already waiting. Paul, a well-known lawyer in his 40s, renowned for defending women's rights in cases of abuse and marriage fraud, smiled as she walked in. Caroline, congratulations on completing your course. I read your online post. It was powerful. Caroline blushed. That post was just a warning drawn from my own experience. Michael nodded, but it spread like wildfire. All of Savannah is talking about it. The post they referred to was Caroline's raw and honest account of nearly marrying a killer. She titled it with a bold headline, I almost married a murderer, and I want other women to be warned. In it, Caroline recounted every detail of how Ryan had deceived her, from the sweet talk and perfect gestures to how he subtly extracted information about her family's assets. She shared red flags to watch for and urged women to run background checks before committing to marriage. The post went viral. Local media covered it extensively. The public response was explosive. Paul opened his laptop and projected a chart onto the board. In just 1 month, our organization has received over 300 background check requests from women across the United States. Michael sighed. That number is both encouraging and deeply concerning. Caroline nodded. It shows just how many people like me are vulnerable unless they're warned in time. Paul looked thoughtful. I also received word from the Providence judiciary. Ryan Johnson has officially been sentenced to 15 years in prison. Charges include fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. Michael closed his eyes briefly, whispering a prayer. Justice has finally arrived. Carolyn clenched her fists. And the case of Lucy Fields? Still no sign of her body? Paul shook his head. Sadly, no. But based on Ryan's statements and financial records, the police are expanding the investigation. If further crimes are uncovered, his sentence will increase. A solemn air filled the room. Michael placed a hand gently on Caroline's shoulder. You've done more than I ever hoped. You didn't just rise up for yourself. You've inspired hundreds of other women. Carolyn smiled, a gentle, liberating smile after months of darkness. I just don't want anyone else to feel the fear and pain I went through. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unfamiliar woman. The message read simply, I read your post. I almost married someone like Ryan, too. Thank you for speaking up. Caroline stared at the message, her heart light. She knew then she had already begun making a difference, small perhaps, but deeply meaningful. Paul closed the file, his eyes filled with trust. Carolyn, you've proven something important. The past doesn't define the future. It's what we do today that defines who we are. Carolyn nodded, and I choose to never stay silent again. Outside the window, autumn sunlight streamed through golden leaves. Savannah was still bustling as always, but within Caroline, everything had changed. From a victim, she had become a powerful voice. Truth may be painful, but facing it is the only way to heal and move forward. 3 years after that horrifying ordeal, Savannah had changed a lot, and so had Carolyn. The organization No More Masks was no longer a small, quiet initiative. It had become a nationwide women's support network, present in over 10 states across the United States. Local offices, legal workshops, and educational seminars were held, regularly reaching thousands of women in need of protection. On television, the evening news was airing a special feature. Thanks to the tireless efforts of the No More Masks organization, more than 18 women have been protected in time from fraudulent marriages, and numerous cases have been formally investigated. The free pre-marriage background check project is gaining traction across the United States. Caroline sat in the organization's headquarters in Savannah, eyes fixed on the screen, her heart swelling with pride and emotion. She remembered the first days, laying the foundation for the project while still bruised, still unable to sleep through the night. Ellen walked in, holding a folder, her face beaming. Good news. The bill we pushed for has passed its first stage in Congress. Carolyn jumped to her feet. Really? They approved public access to criminal marriage records? Ellen nodded. Yep. For the first time in U.S. history, individuals with prior convictions for marriage fraud or domestic abuse will be listed in a national database accessible for verification before marriage registration. Caroline clenched her fists, eyes gleaming with fierce hope. That could save so many lives. Ellen teased, You're becoming a national symbol. You know, people are calling you the luckiest bride in Savannah. Carolyn laughed, a laugh that had taken her a long time to reclaim. Lucky? If this is what luck costs, I just hope no one else ever has to be lucky like that. The desk phone rang. On the other end, Paul's warm, familiar voice came through. Carolyn, are you ready? Tonight's talk at St. Mary's Church is fully booked, and the media is already there. Carolyn paused, eyes gazing out the glass window where golden leaves fluttered in the wind. St. Mary's Church, the place where she had nearly become a victim, was now the place where she would inspire others. I'll be there, Caroline said firmly. That evening, the square in front of St. Mary's Church was packed. Reporters jostled for position. Cameras and microphones pointed toward the small stage, set up at the church steps. On the familiar stone steps where her ruined wedding had taken place 3 years ago, Caroline stood in the spotlight. Her long hair flowed freely, and she wore a simple yet elegant white dress. Father Michael, though retired, stood quietly in. The background, eyes filled with pride. Paul leaned in and whispered, "Ready to shake Savannah again?" Carolyn smiled. "This time, it's for the women, not for me." The microphone echoed as the crowd fell silent. Caroline took a deep breath and began, her voice clear and steady. 3 years ago, I almost became the victim of a murderer disguised. As a groom, the crowd stirred. Camera shutters clicked rapidly. She continued, voice unwavering. He approached me with sweet words and perfect manners, made me believe I was finally loved. But it was all a carefully constructed act to exploit me, just like he had done to other women before me. The audience hung on her every word. The air was still. Ellen, my best friend, and Father Michael, who stepped in at the right moment, they didn't just save me. They taught me that silence is not an option. Caroline raised a binder high in the air. That's why no more masks exists. That's why I stand here today to remind everyone that women have the right to the truth, the right to be protected before it's too late. The crowd erupted in applause. Behind her, Michael's eyes shone with pride as he whispered, "You've become stronger than I ever imagined." Ellen gave Caroline a supportive pat on the shoulder. "You did it." Paul stepped forward, grinning. "The government just confirmed the National Marriage Conviction Transparency Law will officially take effect at the start of next year." Caroline's eyes welled up, her hand clenched tightly. "No one will have to marry in the dark ever again." A young girl shyly approached, handing Caroline a small letter. She whispered, "My mom said it's because of you that she didn't marry the wrong man." Caroline accepted the letter with a gentle smile. "Always remember this, women deserve real love, not lies." The event ended with the crowd departing, full of renewed faith and hope. Father Michael walked alongside Caroline, the church lights casting a warm glow. Tonight, this place finally witnessed something truly beautiful. Caroline stopped at the center of the courtyard, turned and said, her voice bold and alive, "If no one had believed me that day, I would have died. Today, I live to believe in other women." The autumn wind gently swept through, carrying away the old wounds and leaving behind radiant renewal. Never let a perfect surface blind you from the truth. In love, trust must walk hand in hand with awareness and legal understanding. Caroline nearly lost her life to blind trust, but she rose, turned her pain into power, and began protecting others. Every woman deserves sincere love, and society needs transparent systems to stop crimes disguised as affection. Silence enables abusers. Speaking out saves lives.